The gate was iron, black with old snow, and the woman on the other side of it had already been turned away from 6 doors that morning. Her boy stood pressed against her hip, small mittens knotted into her skirt, and the wind coming down off Kettle Ridge cut through the seams of a coat that had been mended one winter too many. She lifted her hand to knock and then let it fall again, because knocking felt like begging, and she had promised herself in the alley behind the feed store that she would not beg one more time in this town. Behind her, the lamps of Elkfall were coming on in their slow amber way, one by one along Main Street, and every one of those lamps belonged to someone who had already said no.
Guido Ularkin, no.
The Reverend, no. The station master, who had counted the change in her palm twice and shook his head, no. The boarding house had a room, but not for her. The doctor had a bed for the boy, but only if she signed a paper she could not read and did not trust. She raised her hand again. This time she made herself knock. Nothing. Only the wind, and somewhere up the slope, a dog that did not bark so much as warn. Her name was Ellen Rook. She was 29 years old. 6 days ago she had buried her husband in ground so frozen the men had needed a fire to soften it. And 4 days ago she had learned that everything he had promised her was a lie shaped like a house. She had walked into Elkfall this morning with a boy, a satchel, and a folded letter, and she had walked all day trying to trade any one of those 3 things for a warm room and a bowl of anything at all. The boy tugged her skirt. His name was Samuel. He was 7. He had not spoken since the funeral.
Mama.
She looked down so fast her neck cracked. He had said it low, almost to himself, and he was pointing up the mountain path, past the black gate, to where a single square of yellow light burned in the dark like a coin held over a candle. Someone's home, he whispered. And that was when the question that would carry her through the next 30 days rose up in her for the first time a euro, not who lived behind that gate, and not whether he would let her in, but what kind of man keeps a lantern burning at that hour, on a mountain nobody climbs, above a town that closes every door. She did not yet know his name. She did not yet know that he had not opened his gate for another human being in 11 years. She only knew that the light was on. So she knocked again, harder this time, and the sound of her small cold fist against the iron rang out across the snow like a bell that had waited a long time to be struck. The sound of that knock did something to the mountain. A shelf of snow shifted somewhere above the tree line and slid, without hurry, into a lower shelf, and the lower shelf held. A crow left a pine and did not come back. And on the far side of the gate, in the house at the top of the beaten track, a shadow moved once behind the yellow square of window and did not move again for what felt to Ellen Rook like a full slow count of 30. She lowered her fist. The cold had gone past pain now into the odd polite numbness that pretends to be warmth and is not. She reached down and lifted Samuel and held him against her, more for herself than for him, and she pressed her cheek to the top of his cap and closed her eyes and told herself that the person inside had heard, and that whatever happened next she had, at least, asked, which was more than she had managed at any of the 6 doors below. She had not asked at those doors. She had merely stood on their porches and let her face do the asking, and she had watched decent people close their doors on the arithmetic of her face and not on any word she had said, and she was not going to do that here. She had made herself knock. Whatever came through this gate would come to a woman who had made noise on purpose. Samuel, in her arms, turned his head against her neck and breathed out a small warm cloud. "Mama," he said so quietly she almost missed it. "Try again." She tried again. Elkfall sat in a bowl of pines at the base of the Kettle Ridge Mountains, in the northwest corner of what the map still called the Bitterwater Territory, and in the spring of 1883 it was the kind of town that liked to think of itself as decent. The church was painted twice a year. The schoolhouse had a bell. The saloon closed on Sundays, and the sheriff, a soft-bellied man named Pruitt, wrote down every arrest in a leather book he kept on a shelf above his stove. Elkfall was decent, and the people who lived there were quick to tell you so, especially the ones who had recently done something that was not. Ellen Rook had come to Elkfall 3 years earlier as a bride. Her husband, Corwin Rook, had been a lean, laughing man with a preacher's tongue and a gambler's hands, and he had brought her from a mill town 200 miles east on the promise of a homestead outside Elkfall that his uncle had left him. He had shown her the deed on the wagon seat. He had read it aloud. She had held her boy on her lap and believed every word, because a woman with a 2-year-old in her arms and no family left living will believe a great many things if the man saying them can also make her laugh. The homestead had been real. The uncle had been real. What had not been real was Corwin's ownership of any of it. She learned this on a Tuesday, from a lawyer in a shining collar who came out from the county seat and knocked on her door as if it were his. He was polite. He was even sorry. He said the deed her husband had shown her had been drawn up by Corwin himself on land that belonged, and had always belonged, to Elkfall Consolidated Timber, which was a company owned by a man named Ashcroft Vane, who lived in a greenhouse on the ridge above the school. The lawyer said Mr. Vane had been generous. Mr. Vane had let Corwin live on the parcel for 3 years, in exchange for a small monthly consideration, which Corwin had paid faithfully and, it now appeared, entirely with money Corwin did not have. Corwin, at that moment, was 2 days dead of a fever that had taken him in a single night. He had left her a wife, a widow, a squatter, and a debtor, all in the same breath. The lawyer gave her 30 days. She had used 6 of them to bury Corwin, to burn the letters she found in his coat, to weep once, hard, in the loft where the boy could not see, and then to walk into Elkfall with the last thing of value she owned, €1, her grandmother's cameo, small and yellow-white as a fingernail moon, €1, to trade for a room until she could think. No one would take the cameo. That was the strange part. Widow Larkin, who had a room to spare and who had smiled at Ellen every Sunday for 3 years, looked at the cameo, looked at Ellen, and said the room was promised. The Reverend said the parsonage was full. The boarding house said the girl who cleaned had just been given the last bed. The doctor said the paper was standard. The station master said he was very sorry, ma'am, and the sheriff said he was very sorry, ma'am, and by the 5th door Ellen understood that something had moved through Elkfall ahead of her, quiet as a shadow at noon, and told every decent person in town that Ellen Rook was not to be helped. She did not yet know who had sent the shadow. She would learn. By the time she reached the last house on Main Street, the sun had gone behind Kettle Ridge and the boy's fingers were the color of skimmed milk. She stood on the porch of the last house, which belonged to a schoolteacher named Miss Yarrow, and she did not knock. She waited because Miss Yarrow had once, on a Christmas morning, given Samuel a small carved horse, and Ellen had thought of her as she walked as the door most likely to open. The door opened before she knocked. Miss Yarrow was a small woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that did not lie easily. She looked at Ellen. She looked at the boy. She looked, very quickly, past Ellen's shoulder toward the ridge, and then she stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind her, and Ellen understood without being told that whatever conversation was going to happen was not going to happen where anyone could hear. "I can't take you in," Miss Yarrow said. Her voice was low and steady. "I can't. I'm sorry. But I want you to listen to me. Please, €1. Listen. There is a path. Behind my woodshed. It goes up. You follow it past the split rock and past the leaning pine and you keep going until the tree's thin. There is a gate up there. Black iron. You knock on it." Ellen stared at her. "Who lives there?" Miss Yarrow's mouth tightened. "A man. A man. A good one. I think." "You think?" "I have not seen him in 7 years." Miss Yarrow reached into the pocket of her apron and pressed something small and hard into Ellen's hand. It was a folded square of paper. "Give him this. Don't open it. Don't read it. Just give it to him. And Ellen, €1, do not tell anyone in Elkfall that I sent you. Do you understand?" Ellen closed her fingers around the paper. It was warm. "Why are they doing this? What have I done?" Miss Yarrow's face went, for one instant, so tired that it looked like a mask slipping. Then it settled again. "You haven't done a thing, child. But your husband did. And a man on the ridge is very angry about it. And the people in this town are afraid of him."
Vonne, Ellen whispered.
"Don't say his name out loud on my porch." She stepped back inside and shut the door. Ellen stood on the empty boards for a full breath. Then she took Samuel's hand and she walked. The path behind the woodshed was narrow and it climbed and it climbed. The pines closed over her head and the town below vanished in 3 switchbacks. And after the 4th she could hear only her own breathing and the boys, and the wind, and something else, €1, the sound, far off and constant, of running water under ice. She walked for what felt like an hour. She stepped over roots. She lifted the boy across a place where the snow had crusted thin over a runnel. Her boots soaked through and her fingers went past cold into the flat gray absence of feeling that comes before real trouble. She thought more than once of turning back. But every time she thought it, she thought also of the 6 doors, and the shadow that had moved through the town ahead of her, and the paper warm in her pocket, and she kept walking. At last the trees thinned. The path leveled. She came around a shoulder of rock, and there, cut into the mountainside like a decision that had been made a long time ago and never revisited, was a wall. A stone wall, waist-high, mortared rough and thick. It ran the width of the clearing. In its center stood the gate, a euro black iron, taller than a man, hinged into 2 great posts of dressed granite. Beyond the gate, 30 yards up a beaten track, sat a house. Not a cabin. A house, built low and long, of stone and squared timber, with a wide front porch and a chimney breathing pale smoke into the dark, and one window on its south wall lit with the same yellow light Samuel had seen from below. She raised her hand to the gate. "Wait," said a voice. It came from her left, from the dark under the pines, and it was not loud, and it did not need to be.
Ellen froze.
A man stepped out of the shadow of the trees. He was tall, though not extravagantly so, and he was broad across the shoulders in the way of men who have spent years lifting things that resist. He wore a long coat of oiled canvas, dark with wet at the hem, and a fur cap pushed back on his head. His beard was full and streaked with early gray. His eyes, in the last light, were the color of river ice. He carried a rifle in the crook of his arm the way a farmer carries a shovel, a euro, not aimed, not raised, but present. "You're on my path," he said. A euro. Ellen's throat closed. She had rehearsed 100 small speeches on the way up, and every one of them fell out of her head. She held out the paper. He looked at it. He did not take it. "Who gave you that?" "A woman in the town." She said, "A euro." "Which woman?" She said not to say. Something moved in his face. Not a smile. Something smaller and older than a smile. "Yarrow." Ellen did not answer. "Yarrow," he said again, and this time he did take the paper, and he unfolded it right there in the dark, holding it close to his eyes. He read it once. He read it a second time. He folded it, very carefully, along the same creases it had come in, and he slid it into the inside of his coat. Then he looked at Samuel. Samuel looked back, unblinking, the way children look at large dogs. "Boy," the man said. "You cold?" Samuel nodded. "He hasn't spoken since a euro," Ellen began. "He just did," the man said. He turned, without another word, and walked to the gate. He did not use a key. He lifted a wooden bar Ellen had not seen from the outside, swung the gate inward on hinges so well oiled they did not sing, and stepped through. He held it open. He did not smile. He did not welcome her. He did not say her name, because he did not know her name. He only stood in the open gate and waited, and after a long second, Ellen Rook walked through it with her son, and behind her the black iron closed with a sound that was less like a door shutting than like a decision being kept. His name, she would learn before the fire had burned down that night, was Wren Halloway, and he had not opened his gate for another human being in 11 years. He did not tell her that. He told her, instead, to sit by the fire, and he told the boy to sit closer to it than that, and he took a kettle off a hook and filled 2 tin cups with something dark and hot that smelled of pine and honey. He set the cups down on a low table. He did not sit himself. The room was long and clean. A stone hearth took up the whole south wall. Above the mantel hung one thing only, which Ellen did not look at too long because she could feel that looking at it too long would be a kind of trespass, a euro, a small oval frame, glass over a lock of pale hair, no photograph. Beside the fire, a wooden rocker. On the far wall, shelves of books, more books than she had seen outside the schoolhouse. She noticed other things without meaning to notice them. A pair of women's boots by the door, worn but well kept, the leather at the toes soft with age, set neatly beside a pair of small child's boots that had not been outgrown so much as outlived. A shawl folded on the arm of the rocker, gray wool, its fringe combed straight. A tin cup on the shelf above the hearth with the initials CH etched shallow into the base, as if by a knife point held by someone who was not quite sure the etching was allowed. A single dried sprig of yarrow tied with a bit of red thread and nailed above the door, its flowers gone brown but its stem still holding its shape. The house was a shrine that did not know it was a shrine. It had been kept exactly as it had been on the morning a wife and a child had walked down the mountain to see a doctor, and it had been kept that way not out of a plan, but out of the daily failure of a man to move a boot he could not quite bring himself to move. Ellen had lived, herself, in a house of small deferred decisions since Corwin died. She recognized the shape of it. She looked away from the boots. She did not want to have seen them. She had seen them. A long table under the window, scattered with the tools of a man who made things. And all a spool of waxed thread, a strip of leather half cut into what might have been a bridle. There was no other person in the house. There was no sign that another person had ever lived in it. And yet the house had been built for more than one. Wren Holloway stood by the window and looked out into the dark toward the town. "How long have they been turning you away?" he asked. "Since this morning." "How many doors?" "6. He nodded once, as if 6 were the exact number he had expected. "You'll sleep here tonight," he said. "There's a room at the back. It has not been used in a long time. The sheets are clean. Keep them clean. I can pay €1. You can't." She flinched. He turned from the window. His face, in the firelight, was not unkind. It was only tired in the specific way of a man who had stopped pretending, a long time ago, to be anything he was not. "I did not mean it as an insult," he said. "I meant it as a fact. You have nothing they'll take. That's why they closed the doors. I don't understand." "You will." He crossed to a low cupboard and opened it and took out a wool blanket, folded so precisely it made a perfect square, and he laid it on the arm of the rocker. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "you will tell me exactly what your husband owed, and to whom and on what paper it is written down. And then we will decide what to do." "We?" He looked at her. It was the first time he had truly looked at her, and Ellen understood, in that half-second, 2 things she could not yet name. The first was that Wren Holloway had already decided something about her before she had walked through the gate, and that decision had been made the moment he read Miss Yarrow's folded paper. The second was that whatever Miss Yarrow had written on that paper had not been about Ellen. It had been about him. He crossed to the door of the back room and opened it for her. "Sleep," he said. "The boy first." She carried Samuel through. The room was small and low and clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand and, on the wall opposite the bed, a shelf of small wooden animals, €1, a horse, a bear, a heron, a fox, each one carved with a patience that felt like grief. Samuel let go of her hand and walked to the shelf and put out one finger and touched the heron's beak. And then he turned back to her, and he said, in a voice as small and clear as a struck bell, "Mama, he made these." "I know, baby. For a kid." She swallowed. "I know." She tucked him in. She sat on the edge of the bed until his breathing slowed. Then she rose and went back to the main room, because she had questions and she was not going to sleep with them in her mouth. Wren Holloway was still standing by the window. "Mr. Holloway." "Wren. She wet her lips. "Whose room is that?" He did not turn from the window. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "It was my son's." "Where is he?" "He isn't." She waited. "He was 6, Wren said. "It was a winter like this one. My wife took him down the mountain to see the doctor because he had a cough. They did not come back. The doctor, €1, never saw them." She understood, then, part of what she was standing inside. She did not say she was sorry, because sorry was the word that had been offered to her by every closed door in Elkfall that day, and she knew now what it was worth. "You have kept the sheets clean," she said instead. "Yes." "For 11 years." "Yes." He turned from the window at last, and his face was the face of a man who had answered a question he had not been asked in a very long time and was surprised to find he could still answer it. "You should sleep, Mrs. Rook," he said.
Ellen.
He nodded.
Ellen.
"Sleep. In the morning I will show you a map, and you will show me a paper, and we will find out together whether Ashcroft Vane has made a mistake this time or only another cruelty. You know him." "I knew him." "How?" Wren Holloway smiled for the first time. It was a very small smile, and it did not reach his eyes, but it was a smile. "He was my brother-in-law," he said, and he blew out the lamp. The lamp went out and the dark that came in behind it was the particular thick dark of a stone house on a mountain in the last of a winter storm. A dark that had textures the softer dark of the hearth where the coals still breathed, the harder dark of the doorway to the back room, the flat, unmoving dark of the shuttered window. Ellen let her eyes adjust. After a while she could see the outline of the rocker by the fire, and the shape of Wren Holloway in it, motionless, and beyond him the small square where the window was. She thought about her husband. There had been a night in the second summer of their marriage, when Corwin had come home very late, and she had waited for him on the porch with a plate of biscuits under a cloth. He had sat down beside her on the step. He had eaten one of the biscuits. He had said, without looking at her, that he was not the man she had thought she was marrying, and that he was sorry about that, and that he would try to be. He had said it like a boy admitting to a broken cup. She had put her hand on his knee and told him she had married him, not a man, and that men could still be built. He had laughed at that, one soft, startled laugh, and had leaned his head briefly on her shoulder. She had forgotten that night entirely until this moment. She sat with it now. He had told her the truth once, in the shape of a broken cup, and she had told him a lie in the shape of a kindness, and both of them had been trying, in their small way, to be worth the other. It had not been enough. Kindness could not, by itself, build a man. Truth could not, by itself, redeem one. But the two of them had sat on the porch and tried, and she was not, in the end, going to pretend that trying was nothing. She would tell Samuel, when he was older, that his father had been a man who wrote down other people's weaknesses and had, on the last page of his book, written one strong thing. She would not tell him more than that. She would let him ask for the rest in his own time, and she would answer him honestly when he did, because Samuel had a right to a father who was a whole man in his memory, not a saint, and not a monster, but a man who had failed at being one and had, at the end, managed one small unfailing act. She would put the ledger, when Judge Beeman was done with it, into a locked box. She would keep the key. When Samuel was 17 or 18 and could carry the weight of it, she would give him the key. She would tell him that this was who his father had been, in full, and that she loved him anyway, and that love was not something anyone was ever going to be able to explain to him, but that he would know it when he was the one doing it. That was what she would say. She was, in this moment, still practicing. She thought about the way he had come home late 3 nights of every week for 3 years and had told her he had been at the saloon, and she had believed him because the alternative had been to not believe him, and there had been a 2-year-old asleep in the loft and she had not been strong enough, then, to carry the alternative. She thought about the way he had laughed with the boy on his knee. She thought about the way he had held her hand at the wedding, both of his hands wrapped around one of hers, and the way he had looked at the preacher as if he could hardly believe the preacher was going to let him get away with something. She had thought at the time that it was joy. She understood now that it had been relief. He had been relieved to be marrying her. Not because he loved her, though she believed he had, in his shallow way. He had been relieved because a wife was cover. A wife and a child were cover. Nobody suspected a man of running errands for Ashcroft Vane if that man had a wife and a child and a homestead and a Sunday coat. She turned her face into the pillow. She did not cry. She had cried in the loft on the night after he died, and she had made herself a promise there that she would not cry for him again until she understood what she was crying for. And she did not, yet, understand. She listened instead. She listened to the fire in the outer room settle in on itself. She listened to the boy breathe. She listened, once, to Wren Holloway rise from the rocker and cross the floor to the mantel and stand there for a long time and then return to the chair. He did not touch the small oval frame with the pale lock of hair. She could tell, by the sound of his boots, that he had not touched it. He had only stood in front of it, the way a man stands in front of a door he has not yet decided to open. She wondered how many nights he had done that. She wondered if he counted. She wondered, and this was the thought that surprised her, whether a person could keep a door closed for 11 years and still, on the 12th, remember which way it opened. She fell asleep with that question in her mouth, and she dreamed, briefly, of a gate she had not seen before, a wooden one, painted white, with a rope on a bell, and she woke, once near dawn, because Samuel had murmured something in his sleep, and she leaned over him to listen, and he said, quite clearly, the word heron, though he could not possibly have heard that word yet, and she lay awake after that until the light came. She lay awake in the small room for a long time that night, listening to the boy breathe, listening to the fire settle in the outer room, listening for footsteps that never came, because Wren Holloway did not pace and did not sleep, or if he slept the way a man on a ship's watch sleeps a euro with one ear open to the dark. Sometime near dawn she got up and stood in the doorway and watched him. He was sitting in the rocker by the fire, not rocking, one hand on the arm and one hand loose on his knee, and his eyes were open and fixed on the coals. She had come up this mountain because she had nowhere else to go, and because a schoolteacher had put a paper in her hand and pointed at a gate, and because a boy had seen a light. She had come expecting a stranger, and she had found a man who kept a dead child's sheets clean for 11 years and hated his own brother-in-law enough to open a gate he had closed against the world. She did not know, yet, that the paper Miss Yarrow had sent up the mountain was not a letter of introduction. It was a warrant, not a legal warrant, private one, signed in Miss Yarrow's careful schoolteacher's hand and folded exactly 3 times and given to Ellen Rook to carry, because Miss Yarrow had understood, the moment she opened her door that evening, that Ashcroft Vane had finally overreached, and that the only person in the county who could hurt him for it was the man who had once loved his sister. The paper said, in 6 words, "She is not the first one." By morning it had begun to snow again. Wren Holloway rose before the light, banked the fire, split wood at the block by the woodshed, boiled water, cracked 6 brown eggs into a black pan, sliced bread from a loaf that Ellen would later learn he baked himself every 3rd day, and set the table for 3. He did all of this without speaking, and without hurry, and without looking to see whether Ellen was watching him from the doorway of the back room, though he knew she was. Samuel came out first. He walked, in his stockinged feet, straight to the shelf of carved animals in the main room. Ellen had not known there was a second shelf, but there was, above the door, and he stood looking at them for a long moment. Then he turned and walked to Wren, and he held out one finger, and he pointed at the plate in Wren's hand. "Eggs?" Wren said. The boy nodded. "Sit," Wren said. The boy sat. They ate. Ellen ate too. She had not eaten anything but a heel of bread since the day before yesterday, and the eggs were hot and salted, and there was butter on the bread, real butter, and coffee, real coffee, black and bitter and hot enough to hurt going down. She set her cup on the table. She reached inside her coat, folded on the chair beside her, and took out the papers she had carried up the mountain. The lawyer's letter with the 30-day notice, the deed her husband had drawn up in his own hand, and the small brown ledger she had found under the loose board in the loft the night after Corwin died. She had not shown that ledger to anyone. She had not been sure, until she walked through the black gate, that she was going to show it to anyone ever. She slid the 3 papers across the table. Wren wiped his hands on a cloth. He picked up the lawyer's letter first. He read it. He set it down. He picked up the deed. He read it. He set it down. He picked up the ledger and he opened it, and he went very still. The ledger was small, no bigger than a woman's palm, bound in cracked leather, and inside it Corwin Rook had kept, in his neat gambler's hand, a record of every payment he had made to Ashcroft Vane over 3 years, and a record of every conversation he had had with Ashcroft Vane in which Vane had asked him for something that was not money. Names. Names of families in Elkfall. Names of parcels of land. Names of men and women in the county who had missed a payment, forgotten a signature, misplaced a receipt. Corwin had been Ashcroft Vane's ear in the saloon and in the church and in the general store, and Corwin had written it all down. Wren turned pages. He turned more pages. He stopped at 1 page. He read it twice. His mouth thinned into a line so straight it looked drawn. "Ellen," he said, without looking up, "do you know what your husband was? A liar. That's the small word for it." He closed the ledger. He set it, very gently, on the table between them, and he laid his hand flat on top of it, the way a man lays a hand on a Bible. "Your husband," he said, "was a courier. Ashcroft Vane pays a man in every town in this county to do what your husband did. Watch, listen, report. Vane uses what he learns to buy land cheap from people who don't know they're about to be sold out. Your husband was paid in that piece of land you lived on for 3 years. He was told it was his in exchange for what's in this book. He was told, I imagine, that when the arrangement ended it would end quietly. And then he died. And then he died. Which was inconvenient for Mr. Vane, because your husband is now no longer available to be quietly ended. But you are. She felt the coffee cool in her stomach. That's why the doors closed. Vane sent word ahead of you yesterday morning. He would have said only that you were not to be given help. He would not have said why. In Elk Fall that is enough. He owns the mill and he owns the note on the general store and he owns 3 of the 6 houses on the south side of the church. He does not have to raise his voice. Why does he want me gone? Because he thinks you know what's in that book. And he cannot afford at this moment in his life for someone to know. Why not? Ren looked at her for the first time since he had opened the ledger. Because his sister is coming home. Ellen did not understand. His sister was my wife, Ren said. She has been dead 11 years, as far as this town is concerned. As far as her brother is concerned. As far as the county records are concerned. He paused. As far as I was concerned. Until 3 weeks ago. He rose from the table. He crossed to a small drawer in the long work table under the window. He opened it. He took out a folded letter, worn at the creases as if it had been read many times, and he brought it back and laid it beside the ledger. This came to me, he said, by a man who rides the mail between the county seat and Elk Fall on Thursdays. It was addressed to me in a hand I know. It was not signed. Said, I am alive. I am coming home. Do not tell my brother. Ellen stared at the letter. Your wife. My wife. Rena Euro. I do not know yet if it is her hand or a forgery. I do not know yet what my son a euro. He stopped. His voice had gone rough. He waited until it came back. I do not know yet what happened to my son. The letter did not say. But Ashcroft Vane a euro does not know she is alive. If she is alive. And if she is alive and she is coming home, then the man who has spent 11 years profiting from her being dead is about to be a very great deal poorer, and a very great deal more exposed. Because everything he has built in this town he built after she was gone, and much of what he has built he built by pretending grief. Ellen let out a breath she had not known she was holding. So when I walked into town yesterday a euro, with a book in your coat that neither of us had read yet a euro, yes. He assumed you knew. He assumed your husband had told you. He assumed that when you tried to trade for a room you would trade with what you knew, and he closed every door before you could open your mouth. And Miss Yarrow a euro. Miss Yarrow taught my son to read. She was the last person in Elk Fall who spoke to my wife the day she left. She has been waiting 11 years for a reason to knock on my gate. She sent one up with you. Samuel, who had been eating quietly, set his fork down. He looked at Ren. Mister, he said, are you sad? Ren looked at the boy. Ellen watched something move across his face a euro, not a smile, not grief either, but something in between that had no clean name. The look of a man who had been asked, without warning, the exact question he had been avoiding for 11 years by a person too small to be lied to. Yes, Ren said. I am. For a long time? Yes. Samuel considered this. Then he slid down off his chair, walked around the table, and, with the enormous seriousness of a 7-year-old who has decided something, put his small hand on Ren Holloway's knee. Me too, he said. Ren did not move. Then, very slowly, he put his rough, calloused hand over the boy's small one, and he left it there, and he did not speak for a long time, and Ellen turned her face to the window so that neither of them would have to see her cry. Outside, the snow had thickened. Somewhere down in the town, a bell was ringing a euro, not the schoolhouse bell, which she knew, but the flat iron bell that hung above the sheriff's office, which was only ever rung for 2 reasons. A fire. Or a body. Ren Holloway lifted his head. Stay here, he said. He rose. He crossed to the door. He took down his coat and his rifle and his cap, and he paused with his hand on the latch. Bar the door behind me. Do not open it for any voice you do not know. If a man comes to the gate, do not answer. If the bell rings a second time before I am back, take the boy through the back room to the woodshed, and there is a hatch under the 3rd barrel from the left, and you take it down into the root cellar, and you close it, and you do not come up until you hear me at the top of it saying the word heron. Heron? Heron. Rene Euro, what is happening? He looked at her. The tired kindness was still in his face, but something else had come in behind it. Something older, something Elk Fall would have recognized if Elk Fall had seen it in 11 years. Ashcroft Vane, he said. has just realized his messenger did not come home last night, and he is about to do something loud. He opened the door and stepped out into the snow, and Ellen barred it behind him, and the bell in the town below kept ringing, slow and hard, 10 strokes and then silence and then 10 more. She would learn, in the hour before he came back, that the body they had found at the base of the ridge road that morning belonged to the lawyer with the shining collar, the one who had brought her the 30-day notice. She would learn, before the day was out, that the lawyer had been on his way, at the time of his death, to see her. She would learn, before the sun set, why. But that was the hour that was still to come, and in the hour that was, Ellen Rook sat on the floor of a stone house on a mountain above a town that had closed 6 doors on her, with a barred door at her back and a 7-year-old asleep in a bed built for another boy, and she opened the small brown ledger her dead husband had kept, and she began, at last, to read. The bell stopped ringing after the second 10 strokes, and the silence that came in behind it was not the silence of a town gone back to work, but the silence of a town listening. Ellen felt it even through the stone walls of the house on the ridge a euro, the way the wind sounded different when a whole valley below was holding its breath. She read the ledger for an hour. She read it the way a woman reads a doctor's chart of her own child a euro slowly, and with the certainty that whatever it said, she would have to know it eventually, so better now in a barred room than later in a courtroom or a graveyard. Corwin's handwriting was small and even. He had liked lists. He had liked, she saw now, the pretense of order a euro, the fiction that a life composed entirely of small betrayals could be redeemed by being written down neatly. The first pages were dates and sums. Rent, he had called them. $12 on the 15th of each month. Delivered by hand to a man named Merle Pike at the back door of the mill office. Later, the sums grew larger. Later still, in the fall of the second year, the entries changed. They stopped being sums and started being names. Josiah Kell a euro, North 40 a euro, behind on the note a euro will sign. Widow Frannon a euro, Orchard a euro, no heirs living a euro, check the will. Reverend Boyd a euro, daughter's marriage a euro, needs a loan a euro, vulnerable. Page after page. Ellen read the names of her neighbors a euro, the men who had tipped their hats to her on the street, the women who had brought jam to her door after her wedding a euro, reduced to lines in a ledger, catalogued by weakness, by grief, by which door in their lives was ajar and which shoulder could be leaned on to open it. She read Miss Yarrow's name on one page. Miss Yarrow a euro, schoolhouse land a euro, leased not owned a euro, county records unclear a euro, pursue. She read Sheriff Pruitt's name. Pruitt a euro, brother in Denver a euro, gambling debts a euro, reachable. She read her own name once. Are a euro, knows nothing a euro, keep it that way. She sat with the book open on her lap for a long time. Some pages were harder than others. There was a page for a family named Ainsley, whose farm was on the west side of the valley, and Corwin had noted, in careful pencil, that the elder Ainsley boy was courting a girl in the county seat and would soon be moving, and that the parents would then be alone with a mortgage they could not carry, and that this would be the time. There was a page for a widower named Kestrel who had 2 daughters and a debt to the mercantile and a horse he loved more than sense, and Corwin had written, beside his name, the single word patience. There was a page, near the back, for the Reverend's own housekeeper, a woman named Delph whose name Ellen had known for 3 years without ever asking after, and Corwin had noted that Delph's brother had died in the war, and that Delph had never received the small back pay pension owed to his widow, because Delph did not know it existed, and Corwin had underlined the observation twice. Ellen sat with that page a long time. She thought about how a man could sit at a table with his wife and eat a bowl of stew and then, after she went to bed, take out a small brown book and write down that the Reverend's housekeeper did not know she was owed money. She thought about how a man could kiss his son on the head goodnight and then, in the same hour, decide that the Widow Frannon's orchard would be easier to buy in the spring after her hip finished failing in the fall. She did not, in that hour, hate Corwin. She noticed past hate. Hate was a hot thing and she was cold in a way that no amount of fire in the outer room was going to warm. What she felt was closer to nausea a euro, the physical rejection of a body being asked to keep something down that was not food. She wrote, in the margin of one of the pages, in her own hand and in pencil, a single line. I am sorry, she wrote. She did not know to whom. She wrote it anyway. She thought, later, that it might have been the first honest sentence anyone had written in that book. Corwin had loved her. She was sure of that, in the way a widow is sure of the small merciful lies that let her sleep. He had loved her badly, and he had loved her while doing this, and both things could be true because human beings were not built to be one thing at a time. But he had also, and this was the harder truth, understood what he was. On the very last page of the ledger, in an ink that was still slightly fresher than the rest, Corwin had written a single line, undated, in a hand that shook. If I die, give this book to the man on the ridge. He had known. He had not told her. He had not warned her. He had not even said his brother-in-law's name. But he had known that the road he was walking would end, and that when it ended, the only person in the county who could stand between his wife and Ashcroft Vane was a man who had not come down off his mountain in 11 years. Ellen closed the book. She sat with it in her lap and she looked at the barred door, and she understood, for the first time since she had walked into Elkfall, that she was not, in fact, alone. She had been walked toward this house from the moment Corwin had written that line. Miss Yarrow had known. Corwin had known. And Wren Halloway, whether he yet knew it or not, had been waiting. Samuel woke. He came into the room in his stockinged feet, carrying the small carved heron from the shelf, which he had not asked to take. He sat down on the floor beside her and leaned his head against her arm. Where is he? The boy asked. He'll be back. How do you know? Ellen thought about it. Because he told us he would. The boy nodded, as if that were sufficient, which for a 7-year-old it was. They waited. The clock on the mantel, a plain wooden clock without a name on its face, ticked its way through the top of the hour, and then through the next. Wind pressed at the shutters. Once, the boy asked if he could put more wood on the fire, and Ellen said yes, and he did it with a solemn care that made her chest ache, laying each split log the way she had seen Wren lay them, small end toward the flame. And then, somewhere below the ridge, 3 gunshots. Not close. Far enough that they might have been a hunter or a signal or nothing at all. But they came in a pattern, 1, and then 2, and then a silence, and then 3 more, and Ellen, who had grown up in a mill town where nobody signaled anybody, understood that this was a language and that it was being spoken by men who did not want to shout. She stood up. She crossed to the door and put her hand on the bar. She did not lift it. She stood there with her palm flat against the wood and she listened. Boots on stone. Not fast. Not slow. One voice.
Ellen.
Wren's voice. Winded. Open. She opened. He came in a rush of cold and snow, and he was carrying over one shoulder a man. The man was alive. His eyes were open. His face was gray. His right hand was pressed to his left forearm, and blood, not much, but real, had soaked through his glove and down the wool of his sleeve. Wren carried him to the long table under the window, laid him down on it as gently as a man lays down a sleeping child, and turned to Ellen. Water. Clean cloth. The tin box on the second shelf. Now. She moved. She did not think. She moved. Samuel, without being told, went to the fireplace and pulled the kettle onto the hook over the flames, and Ellen glanced at him and then at Wren, and then at the man on the table, and she recognized him.
Sheriff Otprevit.
The soft-bellied man from the office with the leather book. The man who yesterday had said, "Very sorry, ma'am," and closed his door on her. He was looking at her now, from the table, with an expression she had not seen on him yesterday. It was, she realized, shame. "Mrs. Rook," he said. "Don't talk," Wren said. "I need to talk. Not while I'm digging in your arm, you don't." Wren cut the sleeve open with a knife so sharp the wool parted before Ellen saw the blade move. There was a hole in the sheriff's forearm, a small round hole, clean front to back. The bullet had passed through. Wren pressed a cloth over both sides and Ellen, without being told, took his place at the pressure while he moved to the tin box she had brought. The sheriff looked up at her. "Mrs. Rook," he said again. "The lawyer. Redfern. The one from the county seat. I know who he is. He's dead. I know. He was coming to see you. He had he had figured out He had a copy of the deed your husband signed, and he had cross-checked it against the county book, and he had seen Sheriff, Wren said without turning. Slow. The sheriff wet his lips. The parcel your husband was living on. It wasn't Vane's. Ellen went very still. What? It was never Vane's. Vane took it in 81 on a bad note against a man named Holloway a man who wasn't around to defend the note and it went through the county clerk on a Saturday afternoon when there wasn't a proper witness present. And Redfern was going to walk into your kitchen this morning and tell you that the parcel your husband forged a deed on is a parcel Vane forged a claim on 11 years ago, and that, in the eyes of the actual law, both those pieces of paper are worthless and the parcel still belongs on the books to a euro. He stopped. He looked at the man bandaging his arm. To you, he said. Ren, it's still yours. It always was. Ren did not look up. He tied the bandage. He tied it neatly. He tied it the way he did everything, which was as if he were doing it for the last time. Who shot you, he said. Pike. Merle Pike. Vane's man at the mill. He rode down the ridge road at first light and he met Redfern's buggy at the switchback and he shot Redfern in the chest at 4 feet and I heard the shot from my office window and I rode out and I found Redfern on the road and Pike on the shoulder trying to make it look like a robbery. And I told him to put down the pistol and he did not put down the pistol and I shot him first and he shot me second and I fell off my horse and lay in the ditch until I heard your gate open. Pike, Ren said. Dead. Redfern too. Vane knows. By now. Ren turned. He looked at Ellen. He looked at the boy sitting cross-legged by the fire, holding the wooden heron. He looked at the door. Sheriff, he said, can you ride? With one hand. You will need to. Ren a euro. I need you to ride to the county seat. Not to Elk Fall. Do not go back into Elk Fall. Ride the switchback down to the river and take the river road east and ride until you find a man named Judge Beeman. You will not know him. He will know me. You will tell him that the widow of Corwin Rook is on my mountain with a ledger, and that Ashcroft Vane's paper hand is opened at last, and that I am asking, after 11 years, for his help. Say the word, please. He will know what it means. Ren, you can't a euro. I can. You'll ride? The sheriff pushed himself up on his good elbow. His face was gray, but his mouth had gone hard. Ren, before I ride a euro, you should know. There's another thing. Something Redfern said in the ditch before he went. He said a euro. He stopped. He looked at Ellen. His mouth worked. He said, tell Ren Holloway his wife is alive. She has been alive the whole time. She has been living in a boarding house in the county seat for 11 years under her mother's maiden name, and she has been writing letters to her brother every Christmas asking him to send word to Ren, and every Christmas her brother has burned the letter. The room was very quiet. Ren put both his hands on the edge of the table. He looked at the wood between his hands. Say that again, he said low. The sheriff said it again. Ren closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a long time. His shoulders did not shake. His breath did not catch. He simply stood with his eyes closed and his hands on the table and let the words find whatever place inside him they were going to have to live now. When he opened his eyes, Ellen thought she had never seen a face change so completely without moving. Ride, he said. The sheriff rode. They watched him from the porch a euro, Ren and Ellen and Samuel a euro, a slow gray figure on a slow gray horse working his way down the switchback in the falling snow. His good hand on the reins and his bad hand tucked into his coat, the wounded sleeve dark against the pale wool. He did not look back. Ren watched until the horse was a moving speck in the pines, and then a memory of a speck, and then only the road. He turned from the porch. He said, come inside. They came inside. He barred the door. He walked to the mantel. He stood in front of the small oval frame with the lock of pale hair, and he looked at it, and he did not touch it, and he did not take it down. He only looked. Ren, Ellen said. Sit, he said, without turning. She sat. I need to tell you, he said, what happens next. I need you to hear all of it, because after I say it I will not say it again, and after tonight there will not be time to say anything twice. She waited. Ashcroft Vane, he said, will not come up this mountain himself. He never has. He will send Merle Pike, except Merle Pike is dead in a ditch. He will send someone else. He will send men who are used to being sent, and he will pay them out of a lockbox in the back room of the mill, and he will tell them that there is a widow on the ridge with a book in her coat that is going to ruin him, and he will tell them to bring the book down and to leave the widow where they find her. Ellen felt Samuel move closer to her leg. He will do this tonight, Ren said, because tomorrow the switchback will be a road for a judge. Tonight it is a road for a hired man. How many, she said. 3. 4. Not more. He is a cautious man in his cruelty. He does not like witnesses. And you? I have not fired a rifle at a person in 12 years. I have not needed to, but I did not build the wall around this place for the deer. She did not ask him if he could. She had watched him work all morning, and she had watched him carry a wounded sheriff up a mountain path, and she had watched him tie a bandage with hands that did not shake, and she had understood, without being told, that Ren Holloway was a man who had spent 11 years choosing not to do a thing he was entirely capable of doing. Choosing that was different from being unable to. "What do you need from me?" she said. He turned from the mantel at last. "I need you," he said, "to keep the boy alive." "Yes. There is a way out. I told you about the root cellar under the woodshed. There is a passage from the cellar that comes up in a hollow behind the split rock on the path. It is narrow and it is cold and it is not pleasant. If the gate is breached, you take the boy and you keep going down the mountain until you strike the river road, and you follow the river east, not west, until you find a stone bridge, and on the far side of the stone bridge there is a farm with a red barn, and the man there is named Ober, and you tell him the word Heron, and he will hide you until the sheriff and the judge can come." "Heron, Heron. You said Heron before. It was our son's word." He said it without pause. He said it the way a man opens a drawer he has kept closed for a long time, deliberately and once and all the way. He could not say his own name for the longest time. He could say Heron. He said it about everything he loved. He said it about his mother. He said it about the horse. He said it once about me. Ellen did not speak. "I have not said it aloud in 11 years, Ren said, "except into a fire at night, when there was no one to hear it. Tonight I will say it if I need to, and you will know when you hear it that it is me. And no one else in this county knows that word." Samuel, at her hip, looked up at Ren. "I know a word," the boy said. Ren looked down at him. "What word?" Ren said. Samuel considered. His face went, for a moment, older than it had any right to be. "Papa," he said. Ellen closed her eyes. Ren Holloway knelt very slowly, and he put his hand on the boy's shoulder, and he said, "That's a good word. You keep that word. You do not use it tonight. You use the other one. All right?" Samuel nodded. "All right," Ren said. He rose. He looked at Ellen. "Now, the ledger." "Yes. Bring it." She brought it. He carried it to the long table under the window. He set it down. He turned to a shelf and took down a second book, a large flat book, bound in dark cloth, the pages inside blank, and he took out a stub of pencil and he laid both books side by side. "We will copy it," he said. "Every page. In your hand and in mine. If they take one, they will not have both. If they take both, the judge will still have the sheriff's word, and the sheriff has written with the original page torn out and folded in his boot, which is the page with Pruitt's own name on it, so he has a reason to keep it dry." She looked at him. "You planned that in the last hour." "I planned that in the last minute." When he said her name, she understood. They worked through the afternoon, the two of them at the long table, Samuel on the floor at their feet with the carved heron and a spool of string, and the fire behind them going down and being fed and going down again. Ren wrote quickly and Ellen wrote carefully, and between them they copied every page of the small brown book into the large flat one, and when they were done Ren tore 3 pages out of the middle of the copy, folded them separately and hid them, one in the flour bin, one in the hollow of a book on the shelf called The Life of Job, and one under the base of the wooden clock on the mantel. "If they find one," he said, "they will think they have found the hiding place. They will not look for a second one. They will certainly not look for a third. You have done this before." "I have not. I have thought about it for 11 years. The light began to go. He fed Samuel. He fed her. He ate himself standing, a piece of bread and a piece of cheese and half a cup of water, because he did not want, he said, to be full when he needed to be quick. He checked the rifle. He checked a second rifle from a case under the bed in the back room that Ellen had not known was there. He checked a pistol. He unlocked a small iron box under the hearth and took out a handful of paper cartridges and slipped them into the pocket of his coat. He went to the door of the back room and he stood a long time in it, looking at the shelf of carved animals. He came back. "Ellen," he said. "Yes." "If it goes wrong, don't. If it goes wrong, and you get to Ober's farm, and the judge comes, There is a tin box behind the loose brick to the right of the hearth. Give it to my wife. If she comes, do not open it. Do not read what is inside. Give it to her. Ren. Say yes. Yes. Good. He went outside. She heard him at the wall. She heard him at the gate. She heard him walk the perimeter of the clearing, slow and steady, in a pattern that must have been as familiar to his feet as breathing. She heard him come back to the porch and stand for a while, looking out into the falling snow. Then he came in and he barred the door and he took a chair to the far corner of the main room, where he had a clean line of sight to both the front door and the shuttered window, and he sat down with the rifle across his knees. Sleep, he said. Both of you. In the back room. Close the door. If you hear anything, do not come out. If you hear my voice, do not come out. If you hear the word heron, come out and go. They slept, or Samuel slept, curled against her side in the bed built for another boy, and Ellen lay with her eyes on the shelf of carved animals and listened for the sound of feet in snow that she could not yet hear. She heard them at 40 minutes past 10. For men, they came up the switchback slow, in the way of men who did not want their coming to be a surprise for their own sake, because a startled man is a fast man, and startled men die faster than tired ones. Wren Holloway heard them when they were still a full quarter of the way down the last rise, because the ridge road at that point crossed a stretch of shale, and shale does not lie about weight. He had been sitting in the chair for 4 hours. He did not stand. He listened. He counted the pattern of the feet. 4. 2 heavier, 2 lighter. The 2 lighter were staying back, 1 on each flank. The 2 heavier were coming up the middle. That was the shape of a squad that had done this before in some other town in some other war. He rose quiet as furniture. He crossed to the door of the back room. He did not open it. He tapped once, twice, then once. It was a signal he had told Ellen about that afternoon and had made her repeat back to him. It meant, they are here. Get to the woodshed. Now, he heard, from inside, her bare feet on the floor. He heard the boy's murmur. He heard the small creak of the back window, which opened not onto the outside world but onto a covered passage he had built long ago between the main house and the woodshed, for the winters when the snow got waist deep. He heard her lift the boy through it. He heard her follow. He heard the window close. He counted to 10. Then he took his rifle and he took his pistol and he went to the front door and he opened it. He stepped out onto the porch. He did not step off the porch. He stood in the doorway with the fire behind him and the snow in front of him, and he called out, in a voice that did not raise itself but carried anyway, the way his voice had always carried, one of the many things his wife had once loved about him. Gentlemen. The 2 heavier sets of feet stopped. The 2 lighter sets did not. I know you are 4, Wren said into the dark. 2 of you have flanked. The one on my left is behind the split rock. The one on my right is behind the leaning pine. I would like the 2 of you to come out into the middle of the road where I can see you, and I would like you to do it before I count to 3, because at 3 I will fire twice, and I do not miss at this distance. Silence. 1, Wren said. The one on the left came out from behind the split rock. Hands lifted. 2. The one on the right came out from behind the leaning pine. Hands lifted. Wren did not say 3. Good, he said. Now the 4 of you will stand where you are, and 1 of you will speak, and you will tell me which of you is being paid the most, and I will speak only to him. A pause. Then a voice from the middle. Older. Not Elk Fall. Denver, maybe. The voice of a man who had been hired for this specific kind of thing for a very long time. That would be me. Name. Doesn't matter. It does to me. The man laughed, once, without warmth. Holloway. You have a widow in that house. You have a book in that house. Mr. Vane wants the book and does not particularly want the widow, but she is a witness now, so she will need to come with us as well. You can hand out the book. You can hand out the widow. You can step back inside and close your door, and no one on this mountain will trouble you again, and in the morning nobody will know we were here. That's a bad offer, Wren said. It's the only one. Then here is mine, Wren said. The 4 of you will turn around and walk down the road you came up. You will not stop in Elk Fall. You will ride south. Ashcroft Vane will not pay you tomorrow, because Ashcroft Vane will not be in a position to pay anyone tomorrow. If you take my offer, you will live. If you do not, at least one of you will not. Only one? I have counted my cartridges. I am telling you the truth. The older voice was quiet for a long moment. Holloway. Yes. I heard about you. Down in Cheyenne. Years ago. I heard about a man on a ridge in Bitterwater who did not come off it. That is me. I heard why. Then you know why I am asking you to turn around. Another pause. Then the older voice said, with something that was almost regret, I'm paid for 4 days' work, Holloway. If I turn around and walk down that hill, I am paid for none of it. You will be alive to be paid for the next 4. That's a thin margin. It is thicker than the one I am offering the man behind the leaning pine, who has a rifle on my belt buckle. There was, then, a very small sound from behind the leaning pine, a euro, the sound of a man in the dark hearing his own position described exactly, and shifting his weight without meaning to. Wren fired. Not at the leaning pine. Above it. The bullet went through a low branch of the tree exactly 3 feet above the shooter's head, and the branch, which had been carrying 6 weeks of snow and 1 dead squirrel, came down all at once in a soft, heavy rush of white, and the man behind the leaning pine went down with it, and his rifle went into the drift, and by the time he had dug himself out he was staring up the barrel of a second rifle held by Wren Holloway, who had crossed 12 yards of porch and yard in the time it takes most men to blink twice. You have a choice, Wren said down at him, quiet. You can lie there and be still, or you cannot. The man lay there and was still. The older voice, from the middle of the road, said, Well, Wren said. The older man tilted his head. He looked at his fallen colleague. He looked at Wren. He looked, for a long second, at the small square of yellow light in the window of the house. Boys, he said, without turning. We're going home. The 2 flankers lowered their hands. The heavier one beside the older man said, Are you a euro? I said we're going home. They went. They walked, all 4 of them, back down the ridge road in the falling snow, and the older man did not look back, and the man from behind the leaning pine walked with a limp for the first 100 yards and then straightened out, and Wren Holloway stood on the porch with his rifle in his hand and watched them until they were gone, and then he stood for another 10 minutes to be sure they had not doubled back, and then he lowered the rifle. He walked to the woodshed. He tapped in the pattern. Heron, he said, into the boards. The hatch came up. They came up out of the cold dark into the light of the shed, and Ellen Rook, who had been holding her boy against her chest for 40 minutes in a hole in the ground with her heart trying to break its way out through her ribs, looked up at Wren Holloway and did not say anything, because there was no word for it, and Wren Holloway looked down at her and also did not say anything because he understood. He walked them back to the house. He rebarred the door. He knelt by the fire and he built it up until the room was warm enough to feel warm, and he wrapped the boy in the wool blanket, and he sat on the hearth with his rifle across his knees, and he said, Now we wait for the morning. The morning brought a judge. The morning brought the sheriff, riding beside a black buggy drawn by 2 matched roans, with one arm in a proper sling and the other on the reins, and the buggy carried a small, white-haired man in a black coat and gold spectacles who climbed down onto the porch of the stone house on the ridge as if he had been climbing down onto that porch for years. Judge Beeman looked at Wren Holloway. Wren Holloway looked at Judge Beeman. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then the judge said, You look older. I am older. Please. That was the word. I got it. They embraced, briefly and roughly, in the way of 2 men who had once done a hard thing together and had not seen each other since. The judge stepped back. He adjusted his spectacles. He looked past Wren at Ellen Rook, who stood in the doorway with her son at her hip, and he removed his hat. Mrs. Rook, Your Honor, I understand you have a book. I have 2. Better. He turned back to Wren. There is something else you should know, he said, before we go down that mountain. Wren waited. The judge cleared his throat. There is a boarding house in the county seat, on Cotter Street, that has had a lodger for 11 years under the name of Holloway. Not her maiden name. Her married name. She never changed it. Wren. Not once. Not on the register. Not on the letters that came in for her. Not on the small brass plate on her door. Wren did not move. She has, for 11 years, the judge said, been raising a boy. Everything in Wren Holloway's face went absolutely still. He is 14 now, the judge said. His name is Silas. He has your eyes. She wrote to her brother every year, and every year her brother returned the letter unopened, and every year she believed it had been you refusing her, because the letters came back with a hand she believed she recognized as yours but which was, in fact, Ashcroft Vane's, because Vane is a very good forger of hands, as we now know, having found in his safe last night €1. He gestured at the sheriff. With the help of a warrant your friend, the sheriff, was pleased to serve at 3 in the morning. A stack of 11 unopened envelopes tied with a black ribbon. Wren put out one hand and steadied himself on the porch post. Ellen took Samuel's hand. She is on her way, the judge said softly. She left the boarding house at first light. She will be here by noon. Wren did not answer. He did not have to. He walked, without a word, to the front gate of his own house. He lifted the wooden bar. He set it aside. He pushed the black iron open, both wings, so that it stood open wide to the mountain and to the road and to the pines and to whatever came up the switchback next. He did not close it. He stood in the open gate and he waited, and behind him Judge Beeman put his hat back on his head and turned, gently, to Ellen Rook and said, "Mrs. Rook, would you and your boy come sit with me by the fire? I would like to hear the story of a small brown book, and I think its author's widow tells it best." She went. She left Wren Halloway standing in his open gate, in the clean cold morning, with the snow coming down light and slow and the black iron finally, at long last, no longer closed. At noon a wagon came up the switchback. It was not driven by a stranger. It was driven by Miss Yarrow, the schoolteacher, who had been waiting at the bottom of the road since dawn for the wagon that had come from the county seat, carrying the passenger she had been waiting 11 years to bring home. Wren Halloway did not step out to meet the wagon. He stood in the gate. The wagon stopped at the wall. Miss Yarrow got down. A woman got down after her, slowly, carefully, holding the hand of a tall boy of 14 who had his father's shoulders and his mother's mouth and eyes that were, exactly, his father's. The woman was Wren Halloway's wife. Her name was Cora. She had been dead for 11 years to every soul in Elkfall except the schoolteacher who had put her on a wagon at 3 in the morning of the day she left, and the judge who had helped her disappear, and the brother who had made her disappearance permanent in every ledger and letter he could reach. She walked to the gate. She looked at her husband. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke. Then the boy €1, the tall boy of 14 who had grown up in a boarding house on Cotter Street believing his father did not want him €1, looked at the man in the gate and said, in a voice that had only recently deepened and had not yet learned to hide anything, "Sir." Wren Halloway looked at his son. "Silas," he said. The boy nodded. He was trying very hard not to cry. He was failing. He put out his hand, the way a man puts out a hand to another man he does not know but has been told to respect. Miss Yarrow at the wagon did not speak. She had spoken enough on this mountain already. She had spoken 11 years ago to a woman at 3 in the morning, packing a bag by candlelight, and she had spoken 11 years ago to a judge in a hotel room in the county seat, and she had spoken 2 nights ago on a folded piece of paper pressed into a stranger's palm. She had done her speaking. She stood now with her gloved hand on the wagon rail and let her face do what her voice did not have to. Cora Halloway had aged in the way that women age when they have carried something heavy for a long time without setting it down. She was thinner than her wedding portrait if there had been a wedding portrait, and there had not. Her hair, which had been fair, had gone the paler shade fair hair goes, which is not gray but a kind of frost. Her eyes had not changed. Her mouth had not changed. She was wearing a coat that was too good for the wagon, because she had put on her best that morning without quite admitting to herself why, and she was holding her son's hand in the way a woman holds a rope on a boat in a squall €1, not tightly, but constantly. Silas Halloway was 14 years old and did not entirely know what to do with his hands. He had been told on the wagon ride up what he was walking into. He had asked one question. He had asked whether his father would be angry that he was tall. His mother had said, "No, sweetheart, no, he will not be angry that you are tall," and Silas had ridden the last 2 miles in silence, working out, in the way that boys work things out, what expression a man would put on his face if he wanted to look like a person who was not afraid. He had not gotten it right. His face, at the gate, was open and unguarded and afraid. It was the face of a boy meeting his father, which was, in the end, the correct face. Ellen Rook, on the porch, understood without turning that Judge Beeman, beside her, was looking not at the gate but at her. She met his eyes. He inclined his head once very slightly. It was the courtesy of an older man to a younger woman who had brought a book up a mountain, and it was also, she understood, a small quiet thanks that could not be spoken aloud in this hour, because this hour belonged to the family in the gate. She looked away. She did not want to be looked at for this. She wanted very much to be nothing more, in this moment, than a woman on a porch, holding her child, watching a door that had been closed for 11 years open in a way that no one on this mountain was ever going to close again. Ren looked at the hand. He did not take it. He stepped forward, past the open gate, and he put both his arms around his son, and he held him, and after a long moment the boy's arms came up too, and around him, and Cora Holloway put her hand to her mouth and closed her eyes and let go, at last, of 11 years of a grief that had to be swallowed daily because there had been no other place to put it. Ellen Rook, watching from the porch with the judge and the sheriff and her own boy at her hip, did not intrude. She did not step forward. She did not speak. She stood, instead, and she looked at the small carved heron in Samuel's hand, and she thought about the shelf of carved animals in the back room, and she understood that a man who carves a heron for a boy who was not there to receive it, and keeps it on a shelf for 11 years, is a man who never stopped believing. He had told her, in the dark of the first night, that his son was not. He had been wrong. He had wanted to be wrong. He had prayed to be wrong, in the private, wordless way of men who no longer pray. And now, in the middle of a snowy morning in the spring of 1883, at the open gate of a house on a mountain above a town that had closed 6 doors on a widow 48 hours earlier, Ren Holloway held the son he had not seen since the boy was 3, and Cora Holloway watched them, and Miss Yarrow wept quietly with her hand on the wagon rail, and down in the town of Elkfall, in the office at the back of the mill, Ashcroft Vane sat at his desk with 3 federal marshals in the doorway and understood, at last, the exact measure of the mistake he had made when he closed 6 doors on the widow of a courier he had been careless enough to bury. He would go to trial in the summer. He would go to prison in the fall. But those are things for the record. For the story, what mattered was this. That afternoon, when the tears had been cried and the tea had been drunk and the judge had unfolded, on the long table under the window, a stack of 11 envelopes tied with a black ribbon and set them, unopened, in front of Cora Holloway to open in her own time, and had left the room to give them privacy €1. That afternoon Ren Holloway stepped out onto his porch, and he found Ellen Rook sitting on the top step with Samuel asleep against her shoulder. He sat down beside her. For a long time neither of them said anything. Then he said, "You'll need somewhere to live." "Yes, there is a parcel of land. I've heard." He almost smiled. "The house on it isn't much. Your husband did not keep it well. I can keep a house. I know you can." Another silence. The sun had come out. It was making the snow bright.
Ellen.
"Yes. I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear it clearly, because I am not a man who is good at asking twice." She waited. "My wife has come home," he said. "She has come home to a house she has not lived in 11 years, to a husband she has not seen in 11 years, to a son she has raised alone, and a life on this mountain she has to learn again from the beginning. There is a great deal of quiet work in front of us. There is not, in front of me, any question of what we are to each other. She is my wife. She will be my wife. That is not for asking. I know. But you will need work. And you will need a home, and a school for the boy, and a way to stand in that town again without being afraid every time a door opens. And I have a parcel of land, and I have a name in this county that, when a judge rides up my mountain, is a name people will listen to again. And I have, in this house, a shelf of carved animals my son does not need anymore. There is a heron. There is a fox. There is a horse. There is a bear. Samuel took the heron this morning without asking. He should keep it. He should have the others too if he wants them." She looked down at her boy's dark hair. "And you should have," Ren said, "the parcel. Free and clear. Deeded properly this time. In your name and in his after you. I will speak to Judge Beeman before he leaves." Ellen did not answer for a long time. Then she said, "I did not come up this mountain to be given anything. I know that. I came because there was a light on. I know. I have been given a great many things in my life," she said, "by men who then wanted them back. I have been given a wedding ring and a deed and a promise, and every one of them was a hook. Yes. So I want to be clear with you. Yes. If you deed me a parcel and it is a hook, I will burn the parcel down and walk into Elkfall with my boy and my hands empty, and I will build something out of that instead. It is not a hook. Then what is it? Wren Halloway looked out over the pines. The sun was going down again, though it was not yet late, because it was still spring in Bitterwater and the days had not fully learned how to be long. It is a debt, he said. You brought a book up my mountain. That book gave me back my son. There is not enough land in this county to pay that. Parcel is what I have. Ellen was quiet. That, she said, is different. Yes. Then thank you. You are welcome. He rose. He put his hand, briefly, on the crown of Samuel's head, and he went inside to where his wife and his son were opening 11 envelopes at a table under a window in a house that had, at last, more than one person in it again. Ellen Rook stayed on the porch a while longer. She sat with her boy against her shoulder and she watched the shadows of the pines lengthen across the clearing, and she thought about a light in a window, and a black gate, and a folded paper, and a small brown ledger, and a schoolteacher who had waited 11 years to knock on a door she did not have the strength to knock on herself. She thought about her husband. She thought about him, for the first time since he had died, without either love or hate, but with something quieter, which was pity. A euro, not the pity of a wife but the pity of a witness. For a man who had written down every weakness in his town and, on the last page, had written the only strong thing he ever did, which was to tell his wife, if he died, to bring the book to a man on a ridge. She let the pity settle. Then she let it go. She stood up. She lifted Samuel in her arms. He stirred and murmured something and put his face into her neck.
Mama.
Yes, baby. Are we home? She thought about it. She thought about the town below, and the 6 closed doors, and Miss Yarrow's porch, and the parcel with the poorly kept house on it, and the school with the bell, and the judge riding down the switchback in the morning with a signed deed in his coat, and the shelf of carved animals in a back room a mountain man had kept clean for 11 years, and the boy in her arms who had spoken his first word in weeks to a stranger who had asked him if he was cold. Not yet, she said. She kissed the top of his head. But we will be. Before she went inside, she looked once more down the switchback. The pines had a blue in them, the last blue of dusk. Somewhere among them a fox called twice and stopped. A single lamp had come on in the schoolhouse below. A euro, Miss Yarrow. Home again, unhooking her coat, feeding a stove. Beyond the schoolhouse, on the long slope that ran down to the river, a light had come on in a small house. Ellen had not yet been inside. A euro, a house on a parcel of land that would, by tomorrow, bear her name on paper properly witnessed and properly filed, and that would, by the summer, have new shingles on the roof and, by the fall, a small painted gate. She would paint the gate white. She had decided that some hours ago, without realizing she was deciding it, when she had walked out onto the porch and seen Wren Halloway's black iron standing open in the sun. Her gate would be white, and it would not be tall, and it would swing on a rope hinge that a child could work, and there would be a bell on it, small and clear, and any traveler on the ridge road at dusk who needed something, a euro, a warm room, or a bowl of anything at all, or only the confirmation in a very cold country that another human being was still awake, a euro, would be able to reach up and ring it, and someone in the little house would come to the door. That was what she wanted. That was what she was going to build. She did not, in her own account of herself, believe in signs. She believed in doors and in the people who chose to open or close them. But she thought, as she stood on the porch of the stone house on the ridge, that if she ever built the gate the way she wanted to, she would put above it a small crossbeam, and she would carve into the crossbeam in careful letters one word: Heron. Because a word that had been kept in a fire for 11 years, and had come out unburned, deserved to be put somewhere the wind could find it. The last of the sun went out of the clearing. Somewhere on the road below, faint and far, a bell rang in Elkfall, a euro, not the sheriff's bell this time, but the schoolhouse bell, small and clear, which Miss Yarrow rang every evening at dusk to call the children in from the road, and which she had rung tonight, though there were no children left on the road, because sometimes a woman rings a bell simply to say, into the falling dark, that she is still here. Ellen Rook listened until the bell had finished. Then she carried her boy inside, and she closed the door of the stone house on the ridge behind her, but she did not bar it. There was no longer any need. If this story stayed with you, I would love to know which moment reached you most: a euro, the 6 closed doors, the folded paper, the light in the window, the heron on the shelf, or the open gate at noon. Share it in the comments and stay with us for the next one. There are more frontier tales of courage, home, and second chances to come, and there will always be a light on for you when you come back.